The morning sun cast long shadows across Westfield University's historic campus as Jasmine Williams clutched her acceptance letter, still hardly believing she was really here. The ivy-covered buildings and manicured lawns looked exactly like the photos she'd studied online for months, but nothing had prepared her for how small she would feel standing among them. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood in Detroit, Jasmine had always been the smartest kid in the room. Her high school teachers had run out of advanced math books to give her by junior year. But here, at one of the country's most elite universities, she wondered if her partial scholarship and determined spirit would be enough. "You look lost," said a friendly voice. Jasmine turned to see a tall girl with colorful beads woven into her braids. "That obvious, huh?" "I'm Zoe," the girl said, extending her hand. "First day too?" Jasmine nodded, grateful for the friendly face. "I'm trying to find Euler Hall for advanced calculus." Zoe's eyebrows shot up. "Advanced calc on your first semester? Brave, that's Professor Harrington's class. Well, you'll see." They walked together across the quad, Zoe pointing out buildings and sharing bits of campus gossip. Jasmine listened politely, but her mind was already racing ahead to the day's classes. Math had always been her safe place, the one area where everything made perfect sense. "This is me," Jasmine said when they reached Euler Hall, an imposing stone building with narrow windows. "Good luck in there," Zoe said, giving her a supportive smile. "Find me at the dining hall later?" Jasmine agreed and pushed open the heavy wooden door. Inside, the lecture hall was already half full. Students clustered in groups, their easy laughter suggesting long-established friendships. She scanned the room, looking for an empty seat, preferably near the back. "Excuse me," she murmured, sliding past a row of students to reach an empty chair. A few heads turned, gazes lingering a beat too long before returning to their conversations. Jasmine had expected this. Being one of the few black students in advanced STEM courses wasn't new to her. She pulled out her notebook and pencil case, arranging them neatly on the small desk attached to her chair. At exactly 9 a.m., the side door swung open and a tall, silver-haired man strode in, his leather briefcase swinging at his side. The room immediately fell silent. "Welcome to Advanced Calculus," he announced without preamble. "I am Professor Richard Harrington. If you're looking for an easy math credit, you're in the wrong room. Over half of you will drop this class by midterms, and I won't lose sleep over it." His cold blue eyes scanned the lecture hall, taking inventory of each face. When his gaze reached Jasmine, it paused, his expression shifting almost imperceptibly. "This is not high school math," he continued. "Some of you may have been the best in your class back home, but that means nothing here. At Westfield, we separate the truly gifted from those who simply worked hard enough to get by." A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Jasmine kept her expression neutral, even as she felt the comment might have been directed at her. Professor Harrington began writing on the board, chalk scratching out complex equations. "We'll start with a review of concepts you should already know. Anyone who can't keep up should consider dropping now rather than later." As he spoke, Jasmine opened her notebook and began taking careful notes. The material wasn't new to her. She'd studied calculus independently since 10th grade, but she wrote everything down anyway, adding her own observations in the margins. 20 minutes into the lecture, Professor Harrington posed a question to the class. "Who can explain the practical application of the chain rule in velocity calculations?" Several hands shot up, mostly from the front rows. Jasmine hesitated, then slowly raised her hand. Professor Harrington's eyes narrowed slightly as he noticed her. He deliberately called on a confident-looking young man in the front row instead. "Tyler," he acknowledged. The student launched into an explanation that was technically correct but lacked depth. Professor Harrington nodded approvingly nevertheless. "Very good," he said. "At least someone did the preliminary reading." The lecture continued, and Jasmine found herself solving problems far beyond what Professor Harrington was teaching. In the margins of her notebook, she worked through complex differential equations, finding patterns and connections that excited her. Near the end of class, Professor Harrington assigned their first problem set. "This will separate those who belong here from those who don't," he said, his gaze once again lingering on Jasmine. "Due Friday, no extensions." As students gathered their things, Jasmine overheard a conversation from the row in front. "Did you see the new girl's face when Harrington ignored her?" A boy whispered. "Classic. He does this every year with the scholarship kids." Give it 2 weeks before she switches to something easier, another replied with a snicker. Jasmine pretended not to hear as she packed up her belongings. She'd faced doubt before. It only made proving herself more satisfying. As the lecture hall emptied, she approached Professor Harrington's desk, determined to make a good first impression despite his apparent dismissal. "Professor Harrington," she began, "I'm Jasmine Williams. I wanted to introduce myself and say I'm looking forward to your course." He glanced up from his papers, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Williams, yes, I received your file. Quite impressive test scores for someone from your background." The pause spoke volumes. Jasmine maintained her smile, though it no longer reached her eyes. "Thank you, sir. I've actually been studying the material in Chapter 3 already. I was wondering if you could recommend any supplementary readings on multivariable applications." Professor Harrington's eyebrows rose slightly. "Chapter 3? We won't reach that until November, assuming you're still with us by then." "I like to work ahead," Jasmine replied simply. "Indeed." He closed his briefcase with a snap. "Ms. Williams' enthusiasm is commendable, but I suggest mastering the basics before attempting to run. Many students find the transition to university-level mathematics humbling." Before Jasmine could respond, another professor entered the room, a younger man with round glasses and a bow tie. "Ah, Richard, there you are," the newcomer said. "Committee meeting in 5 minutes." "Yes, Dr. Reynolds, I'm coming." Professor Harrington turned back to Jasmine. "If you'll excuse me." As the professors left, Dr. Reynolds glanced back at Jasmine with mild curiosity. "New student?" She heard him ask Harrington. "Scholarship case," Harrington replied, his voice low but still audible. "Impressive application, but we'll see if she can handle real mathematics." The door closed behind them, leaving Jasmine alone in the large lecture hall. She stood still for a moment, letting their words wash over her. Then, instead of dejection, she felt a familiar fire ignite within her, the same determination that had carried her from a Detroit public school to these hallowed halls. She opened her notebook again, flipping to the problem set Harrington had assigned. The problems were challenging, certainly, but nothing she couldn't handle. In fact, she could already see multiple approaches to each one. By dinner time, Jasmine had completed the entire week's assignment and was working on problems from Chapter 2. When she met Zoe at the dining hall as promised, her new friend noticed the mathematical equations covering her notebook. "Please tell me you haven't already finished Harrington's problem set," Zoe groaned, setting down her tray of food. Jasmine closed her notebook with a small smile. "Just getting a head start." "You're either crazy or brilliant," Zoe said, shaking her head in amazement. "Maybe both," Jasmine replied, surprising herself with her boldness. As they ate dinner, Jasmine listened to Zoe talk about campus life, the best study spots and which professors to avoid, but part of her mind remained fixed on those complex equations, on the elegant dance of numbers and symbols that had always made more sense to her than people did. Back in her small dorm room that night, Jasmine called her grandmother, the woman who had raised her after her parents died in a car accident when she was just 6 years old. "How was your first day, baby?" Grandma Rose asked, her voice crackling slightly over the poor connection. "It was—" Jasmine paused, considering whether to share her encounter with Professor Harrington. "It was interesting. The campus is beautiful. And your classes. Those professors treating you right?" Jasmine smiled at her grandmother's protective tone. "The classes are good. Challenging, but nothing I can't handle. You remember what I always tell you?" "I know, Grandma. Don't let anyone dim your light." "That's right. Your mama and daddy would be so proud seeing you there. Don't you forget that." After they hung up, Jasmine stood by her dorm window, looking out at the campus now bathed in moonlight. In the distance, she could see lights burning in Euler Hall, probably graduate students working late. One day soon, she would be one of them. But first, she had something to prove to Professor Harrington and everyone else who doubted she belonged. She returned to her desk, opened her calculus textbook to Chapter 3, the material they wouldn't reach until November, and began to read, a small determined smile playing on her lips. The challenge had been set, and Jasmine Williams had never backed down from a challenge, especially one involving mathematics. The numbers were already dancing in her head, beautiful patterns unfolding like flowers. Here in this world of pure logic and elegant proofs, she was home. And no one, not even Professor Harrington, would take that away from her. 3 weeks flew by in a blur of lectures, problem sets, and late nights in the library. Jasmine settled into a routine, finding comfort in the predictable rhythm of university life. Each morning, she'd wake up early, review her notes from the previous day, and prepare for new challenges. By now, she'd completed reading the entire calculus textbook, twice. Professor Harrington's class remained the most difficult, not because of the material, but because of the atmosphere. Whenever Jasmine raised her hand, he would call on someone else. When she turned in assignments, he would flip through them with a skeptical expression before placing them in his briefcase without comment. Despite this, Jasmine consistently scored at the top of the class. Her returned papers came back with reluctant check marks and no comments, while others received encouraging notes or even smiley faces. She tried not to let it bother her, focusing instead on the beauty of the mathematics itself. "I don't get it," Zoe said one evening as they studied together in the library. "Your work is literally perfect. Why is he so hard on you?" Jasmine shrugged, not wanting to state the obvious. "Some people need time to adjust their expectations." Zoe slammed her textbook shut, earning a stern look from the librarian. "It's not fair," she whispered fiercely. "Tyler got praise for that derivative solution last week, and your method was more elegant." "Life isn't fair," Jasmine replied simply. "But math is. That's why I love it." The next day, Jasmine arrived at advanced calculus to find an unusual buzz in the classroom. Students whispered excitedly, and a few cast glances in her direction. "What's going on?" she asked a friendly classmate named Raj. "Harrington's bringing in Dr. Reynolds and some other professors today," Raj explained. "Apparently they're doing some kind of special problem showcase." Jasmine felt a twinge of unease. The last time Dr. Reynolds had appeared was that first day when he and Harrington had dismissed her as a scholarship case. When Professor Harrington entered, he wasn't alone. Dr. Reynolds followed, along with an older woman Jasmine recognized as the head of the mathematics department, Dr. Winters. Behind them came 2 more professors she didn't know. "Good morning," Professor Harrington announced, his voice carrying a note of anticipation that made Jasmine's stomach tighten. "Today we have some distinguished guests from our department who are interested in observing how you approach complex problem solving." The visitors took seats at the back of the lecture hall, notebooks in hand. Dr. Reynolds caught Jasmine's eye briefly before looking away. "I've prepared a special challenge," Professor Harrington continued, "something to separate those with true mathematical insight from those who merely follow formulas." He turned to the board and began writing an equation that sprawled across the entire surface. It was far more complex than anything they'd covered in class, involving multiple variables, nested integrals, and what appeared to be elements of both vector calculus and differential equations. When he finished, he stepped back with a satisfied expression. "This problem combines several advanced concepts. I don't expect most of you to solve it completely, but I'd like to see your approach." The class stared at the board in stunned silence. Even Tyler, usually quick to begin any challenge, looked bewildered. "Now," Harrington said, his eyes scanning the room before settling on Jasmine, "I'd like Ms. Williams to come to the board and attempt this problem." The room went absolutely quiet. Jasmine felt her heart pounding in her chest as all eyes turned to her. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. "Me?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Yes," Harrington replied with a thin smile, "since you seem to find our regular coursework so unchallenging." Jasmine gathered her notebook and pencil and walked slowly to the front of the class. As she passed the first row, she heard Tyler whisper, "He's finally putting her in her place." Standing before the massive equation, Jasmine took a deep breath. This was beyond undergraduate level work. It contained elements she recognized from glimpses of graduate textbooks. The problem was designed to be impossible for someone at her level, or at least someone they thought was at her level. She studied the equation, letting her mind absorb every symbol, every relationship. The room around her faded away as patterns began to emerge in her mind's eye. There was a beauty to this problem, a hidden symmetry that probably even Harrington hadn't fully appreciated. "Whenever you're ready." "Ms. Williams," Professor Harrington said, his tone suggesting he expected her to give up. Jasmine picked up a piece of chalk and began to write. Her hand moved with confidence, breaking down the problem into manageable pieces. First, she identified the core differential equation, then addressed the boundary conditions. Next, she applied a substitution technique she'd discovered in an obscure mathematics journal she'd read over the summer. The chalk scratched against the board as minutes ticked by. No one spoke. No one moved. From the corner of her eye, Jasmine could see Dr. Reynolds leaning forward in his seat, brow furrowed in concentration. After about 15 minutes, Jasmine paused, studying what she'd written. There was an alternative approach, one that would be more elegant. She erased a section of her work and began again, this time using a method that combined elements of linear algebra with calculus. "What is she doing?" she heard Dr. Winters whisper to one of the other observers. "That's not the standard approach." "It's not," the other professor replied. "It's better." Another 10 minutes passed. Jasmine filled the board with neat, precise notation. When she reached the bottom right corner, she underlined her final answer twice and set down the chalk. "I've found 3 possible solutions," she explained, turning to face the class and the row of professors at the back. "The first is the most straightforward, though it requires multiple steps. The second uses a substitution method that simplifies the integration. And the third," she pointed to her final calculations, "approaches the problem as a system rather than a single equation, which reveals an underlying pattern." The silence that followed was deafening. Professor Harrington stood frozen, his expression flickering between disbelief and something that looked almost like fear. Dr. Reynolds was the first to break the silence. He stood up and approached the board, examining Jasmine's work closely. "This third method," he said slowly, "I've never seen this approach before. I adapted it from something I read about quantum field equations," Jasmine explained. "The pattern looked similar, so I thought the technique might apply here too." Dr. Winters joined them at the board, her eyes wide. "Richard," she said to Professor Harrington, "did you know the problem had multiple solutions?" Professor Harrington cleared his throat. "I was aware of the first approach, of course," he said stiffly. "The others are unexpected." Jasmine stood quietly, chalk dust on her fingers, waiting for further comment. The students behind her had begun to whisper among themselves, and she caught Zoe giving her a thumbs up from the third row. "Well," Professor Harrington said finally, his voice tight, "that was informative. Class dismissed. Read Chapter 4 for Friday." Students gathered their things in confusion. The class was ending 30 minutes early. As they filed out, many cast curious glances at Jasmine, who was still standing at the front of the room, surrounded by professors examining her work. "Ms. Williams," Dr. Winters said, "where did you learn these techniques? They're well beyond undergraduate level." "I read a lot," Jasmine replied simply. "Math makes sense to me." "It more than makes sense to you," said the professor Jasmine didn't recognize. "You see connections others miss." Professor Harrington, who had been pretending to organize papers at his desk, finally looked up. "Ms. Williams, you may go," he said curtly. "We need to discuss something privately." Jasmine nodded, gathered her things, and walked toward the door. As she left, she heard Dr. Reynolds say, "Richard, do you realize what just happened? That girl just solved a problem that stumped my graduate students last semester." Outside in the hallway, Jasmine leaned against the wall, letting out a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, the tension drained from her body replaced by a quiet sense of vindication. "That was incredible," said a voice beside her. Jasmine turned to see a young Asian woman with short black hair and glasses. "I'm Dr. Chen. I teach in the department but haven't had the pleasure of meeting you yet." "Jasmine Williams," she replied, shaking the professor's extended hand. "I know who you are now," Dr. Chen said with a warm smile. "Everyone in that room knows who you are after what you just did." Jasmine wasn't sure how to respond to that. Part of her wanted to celebrate, while another part worried about the consequences of showing up Professor Harrington so publicly. "Don't worry about Harrington," Dr. Chen said, as if reading her thoughts. "His pride is hurt, but he'll recover. The important thing is that you've demonstrated extraordinary talent." Students passed by, some slowing down to stare at Jasmine with new interest. "I have a small research group that meets on Thursday evenings," Dr. Chen continued. "We're working on some interesting problems in applied mathematics. You might enjoy joining us." "Really?" Jasmine asked, surprised by the invitation. "Absolutely. In fact, I'm working on theoretical approaches very similar to what you just demonstrated on the board. Dr. Chen handed her a card with an email address and office number. Think about it and let me know. As Dr. Chen walked away, Zoe rushed up, eyes wide with excitement. Jasmine, what just happened in there? Everyone's talking about it. Jasmine looked down at the card in her hand, then back at her friend. A slow smile spread across her face. I think, she said quietly, I just found my place here. That evening, Jasmine called her grandmother with news of the day's events. I knew it, Grandma Rose declared proudly. Didn't I tell you? Your light is too bright for anyone to dim it for long. It feels good, Jasmine admitted, to be seen for what I can do, not who they expect me to be. This is just the beginning, baby, her grandmother said. Just the beginning. Later, alone in her room, Jasmine opened her notebook to a fresh page and began working on a mathematical concept that had been forming in her mind for weeks. For the first time since arriving at Westfield, she felt truly free to explore the full extent of her abilities, without hiding, without fear. The challenge had come, just as she'd expected. But instead of breaking her, it had revealed her true potential to everyone watching, including herself. Word spread quickly across campus about what had happened in Professor Harrington's advanced calculus class. By dinner time, students from other departments were pointing at Jasmine in the dining hall, whispering behind their hands. Some looked impressed, others skeptical, as if they couldn't quite believe the story they'd heard. You're famous now, Zoe said, sliding her tray onto the table next to Jasmine's. The math genius who shut down Harrington. Jasmine picked at her food, uncomfortable with the attention. I just solved a problem. Just solved a problem? Raj joined them, setting down his tray with a clatter. Jasmine, people are saying Dr. Winters nearly fell out of her chair. And apparently Reynolds kept your work on the board for his graduate seminar this afternoon. What? Jasmine looked up in surprise. It's true, added another classmate, Layla, who was in the same dorm as Jasmine. My roommate's in that grad class. Reynolds took photos of your solutions and used them as an example of innovative thinking outside conventional frameworks, or something like that. Jasmine didn't know whether to feel proud or exploited. She hadn't given permission for her work to be shared that way. What about Harrington? She asked quietly. Has anyone seen him since class? The others exchanged glances. He canceled his afternoon lecture, Raj said finally. First time that's happened in like 3 years, according to my TA. That night, Jasmine couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the moment in class. The feeling of all those eyes on her, the chalk dusty between her fingers as she wrote out solutions that had seemed so clear in her mind. Part of her worried about the consequences of showing up a professor so publicly. Would Harrington make the rest of the semester miserable for her? Would other professors now expect mathematical miracles every time she raised her hand? The next morning brought an email from Dr. Chen, reminding Jasmine about the Thursday research group and providing the building access code. We meet in the Applied Mathematics Lab at 7 p.m., the message concluded. No pressure, but we'd be delighted to have your perspective. Jasmine read the email 3 times, still not quite believing that a real professor who did serious mathematical research, wanted her input. Despite her nervousness about the attention she was receiving, she felt a flicker of excitement. Maybe here, finally, she would find people who understood the way her mind worked. Advanced calculus met again on Wednesday. Jasmine arrived early, finding the classroom empty except for Professor Harrington, who was erasing yesterday's work from the board, her work. He turned when she entered, his expression unreadable. Ms. Williams, he said stiffly. Professor Harrington. She took her usual seat, pulling out her notebook and pencil. He continued erasing, his back to her. That was unexpected yesterday. Jasmine waited, not sure if she was supposed to respond. Where did you learn that third method? He asked finally, still facing the board. The system approach. I didn't learn it exactly, she admitted. I adapted it from a paper I read on quantum field theory. The author mentioned how certain wave functions could be viewed as systems rather than single equations. Harrington turned slowly. You read advanced physics papers in your spare time? Mathematics is where physics and poetry meet, she said with a small shrug. My grandmother always told me that. Something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps, or reluctant respect. Before he could respond, other students began filing in, and the moment passed. Professor Harrington returned to his usual stern demeanor, though Jasmine noticed he didn't quite meet her eyes during the lecture. Thursday evening arrived, and Jasmine found herself standing outside the applied mathematics lab, heart pounding. Through the glass door, she could see a small group gathered around a whiteboard, Dr. Chen, 2 graduate students, and another professor she didn't recognize. She punched in the access code and pushed open the door. The conversation stopped as everyone turned to look at her. Jasmine, Dr. Chen smiled warmly. I'm so glad you could join us. Everyone, this is Jasmine Williams, the undergraduate I was telling you about. A tall graduate student with thick glasses extended his hand. Aiden, Dr. Chen showed us your solution to Harrington's problem. Brilliant work. The other graduate student, a woman with a colorful headscarf, nodded. I'm Priya. Your approach to the third solution, using system theory, was elegant. We were just discussing potential applications. The older professor studied Jasmine with curious eyes. Dr. Okafor, he introduced himself, his voice carrying a slight Nigerian accent. I've been working with similar mathematical frameworks in my chaos theory research. Perhaps you'd be interested in taking a look. Jasmine felt a rush of relief and belonging she hadn't experienced since arriving at Westfield. Here were people who didn't care about her background or how she'd gotten into the university. They cared only about the mathematics, the pure, beautiful patterns that had always made sense to her. For the next 2 hours, Jasmine lost herself in formulas and theories, contributing ideas and asking questions without fear of judgment. Dr. Chen guided the discussion but treated Jasmine as an equal participant, not as a student who needed teaching. Your intuitive grasp of these concepts is remarkable, Dr. Okafor said as they wrapped up for the evening. Most students require years of formal training to develop this level of mathematical insight. My grandmother raised me on puzzles and patterns, Jasmine explained. By the time I was 8, we were solving complex logic problems together at the kitchen table. Math was our special language, Dr. Chen smiled. You're fortunate to have had such encouragement. Not everyone recognizes mathematical talent, especially in young girls. Especially young black girls from Detroit, Jasmine added quietly. The room fell silent for a moment. Yes, Dr. Chen acknowledged. The barriers are real, but talent like yours has a way of breaking through barriers. As Jasmine walked back to her dorm that night, the campus felt different, less intimidating, more like a place where she might actually belong. Stars scattered across the clear autumn sky, and she found herself mapping constellations in her mind, calculating distances and angles almost unconsciously. Her phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. How was the Genius Club? Jasmine smiled and typed back, Found my people. Finally. The next few weeks brought a shift in dynamics in Professor Harrington's class. He no longer ignored Jasmine's raised hand, though his acknowledgments remained curt. Her assignments came back with actual comments now, some critical, but substantive rather than dismissive. More significantly, Dr. Chen invited Jasmine to contribute to a research paper the group was preparing on mathematical modeling of complex systems. Seeing her name listed as a contributor, even in the acknowledgments section, felt surreal. You've earned it, Dr. Chen assured her when Jasmine expressed doubt. That insight about the recursive pattern recognition algorithm was crucial. One afternoon in early November, Jasmine was working in the library when Dr. Reynolds approached her table. Ms. Williams, he said, keeping his voice low in the quiet space. Do you have a moment? She nodded, setting aside her notebook. I wanted to let you know that the mathematics department is considering you for the winter term undergraduate research fellowship. It's usually reserved for juniors and seniors. But Dr. Chen and Dr. Okafor have made a compelling case for your exceptional circumstances. Jasmine stared at him, speechless. The fellowship comes with a stipend, he continued, and release from certain course requirements to focus on research. Dr. Chen has volunteered to be your faculty mentor. I don't know what to say, Jasmine stammered. Thank you for considering me. Dr. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. I should also apologize for my assumptions earlier in the term. When Professor Harrington referred to you as a scholarship case, I didn't question his characterization. That was unprofessional and unfair. The frank admission surprised Jasmine more than the fellowship news. I appreciate your honesty, she said finally. The committee will make its decision next week, Dr. Reynolds said, rising to leave. But between us, I'd start planning your research proposal. That evening, Jasmine called her grandmother with the news. A fellowship, Grandma Rose exclaimed, her voice cracking with pride. Oh, your parents would be bursting right now. Your father always said you had a special mind. I wish they could see this, Jasmine said softly. Baby, they see. Trust me on that. There was a pause before her grandmother added, And that Professor Harrington? Is he treating you better now? Jasmine considered the question. Not exactly better, but different. Like he's not quite sure what to make of me anymore. Good, Grandma Rose said firmly. Keep him guessing. Keep them all guessing. After they hung up, Jasmine opened her laptop and began drafting ideas for her research proposal. The barriers weren't gone. She still noticed the surprised looks when she spoke up in study groups, still felt the weight of being different in a place that prized sameness. But something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer fighting to prove she belonged at Westfield. Now she was showing them exactly what they'd been missing before she arrived. The following Monday, Professor Harrington stopped her after class. His usual brisk manner seemed tempered with something new. Hesitation, perhaps. Ms. Williams, he said, I understand you're being considered for the Winter Fellowship. Yes, sir, she replied cautiously. He cleared his throat. Your work has been exceptional. Should you receive the fellowship, you'll need a secondary faculty advisor in addition to your primary mentor. I would be willing to serve in that capacity. Jasmine blinked in surprise. Coming from Harrington, this was practically an apology. I'll keep that in mind, she said carefully. Thank you for the offer. As she left the classroom, Jasmine felt a strange sense of closure. The professor who had tried to humiliate her now wanted to be associated with her success. There was poetic justice in that, a mathematical symmetry that felt right. That afternoon, she spotted a poster for the annual Westfield Mathematics Competition. The grand prize was named after Katherine Johnson, the legendary NASA mathematician who had calculated flight trajectories for the Apollo missions. Jasmine stood before the poster, feeling a connection across time to another black woman whose brilliant mind had changed what was possible. With a smile, she took out her phone and snapped a picture of the details, one challenge at a time. That's how barriers fell. Winter settled over Westfield University, blanketing the historic campus in snow. Students hurried between buildings, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. For Jasmine, the cold months brought a new rhythm to her life. With the winter term undergraduate research fellowship secured, her schedule now revolved around research sessions with Dr. Chen, meetings with her secondary advisor, Professor Harrington, and long hours in the applied mathematics lab. The fellowship had come with unexpected perks beyond the stipend, a small desk in the graduate student area, access to the faculty lounge, and most precious of all, time. Time to explore mathematical concepts that fascinated her without the pressure of regular coursework. How's the research coming along? Zoe asked one evening as they shared hot chocolate in the student center. Outside, snow fell in thick flakes coating the window ledges. It's challenging, Jasmine admitted, but the good kind of challenging. Dr. Chen lets me follow my instincts even when they lead to dead ends. And Harrington? Is he still being... Zoe waved her hand, searching for the right word. Harrington-ish? Jasmine supplied with a small smile. Less so. He actually complimented my approach to non-linear systems last week. I nearly fell out of my chair. Zoe laughed. The man is capable of growth. Who knew? The truth was more complicated. Professor Harrington had indeed softened his stance toward Jasmine, but there remained an undercurrent of tension in their interactions, as if he still couldn't quite reconcile her background with her brilliance. Their advising sessions were strictly professional, focused entirely on the mathematics with little of the mentoring warmth Jasmine experienced with Dr. Chen. Still, progress was progress. In early February, Jasmine began work on what would become the centerpiece of her fellowship research, a paper challenging one of Professor Harrington's own published theorems on predictive modeling in chaotic systems. She hadn't set out to contradict him. The inconsistency had emerged naturally as she explored the mathematical framework. Are you sure you want to pursue this? Dr. Chen asked when Jasmine shared her findings. There are plenty of other directions your research could take. The math points this way, Jasmine replied simply. If I'm wrong, I need to understand why. And if I'm right... She left the thought unfinished. Dr. Chen studied her thoughtfully. Just be prepared. Some academics don't respond well to having their work questioned, especially by undergraduates. Jasmine nodded, understanding the unspoken warning. Still, she couldn't turn away from what the equations were telling her. That wasn't how mathematics worked, at least not for her. As winter melted into spring, Jasmine refined her paper, checking and rechecking her calculations. She worked closely with Priya and Aiden, the graduate students from Dr. Chen's research group, who helped her frame her findings in the language of academic publishing. "This is genuinely groundbreaking," Aiden told her one evening as they reviewed her final draft. "You're not just finding a flaw in Harrington's theorem, you're proposing an entirely new framework. Do you think it will hold up to scrutiny?" Jasmine asked, chewing her lip. "Mathematically? Absolutely," Priya said. "Politically? That's a different equation." The day came for Jasmine to submit her paper to Professor Harrington. As protocol required, she share her work with both advisors before the fellowship committee. She placed the printed copy in his faculty mailbox and sent the digital version by email, then waited anxiously for his response. None came. "Not that day, not the next. He's probably just busy," Dr. Chen reassured her when Jasmine expressed concern. End of semester is always hectic for faculty. But as days stretched into a week with no acknowledgement, Jasmine began to worry. Had she overstepped? Would challenging a professor's published work cost her the goodwill she'd slowly built? The answer came during the mathematics department's monthly colloquium, a gathering where faculty and graduate students presented ongoing research. Jasmine attended regularly, though as an undergraduate she usually sat quietly at the back, absorbing the advanced concepts even when they stretched beyond her current understanding. This particular session focused on applications of chaos theory, with several presenters including Professor Harrington. Jasmine slipped into the lecture hall a few minutes late, having lost track of time in the lab. She found a seat in the back row just as Professor Harrington stepped up to the podium. "Today, I'll be discussing recent developments in predictive modeling for chaotic systems," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the room. Jasmine sat up straighter. This was the exact focus of her paper, the one he had yet to acknowledge receiving. Harrington clicked through several slides, outlining the current understanding of the field, including his own published theorem from 3 years prior, the same theorem Jasmine had questioned in her paper. "However," he continued, advancing to a new slide, "recent work suggests a significant limitation in this approach." The next slide contained equations that looked eerily familiar to Jasmine. Her equations, her approach, her challenge to his theorem. "As we can see here," Harrington continued, pointing to a particularly complex formula, "when we account for these additional variables, the predictive model becomes much more robust." Jasmine's heart pounded in her chest. He was presenting her work without attribution. Around her, faculty and graduate students nodded appreciatively, some taking notes. From across the room, Dr. Chen caught Jasmine's eye, her expression shifting from surprise to concern. Next to her, Dr. Winters frowned slightly, glancing down at what appeared to be a printed copy of Jasmine's paper on her lap. When Professor Harrington finished his presentation and asked for questions, the room remained silent for a moment. Then Dr. Chen stood up. "Interesting developments, Richard," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "The approach you've outlined bears a striking resemblance to work recently completed by one of our undergraduate fellows. In fact, I believe you received a copy of this paper last week for review." The room went utterly still. Professor Harrington's face flushed slightly. "Ah, yes," he said, clearing his throat. "I was getting to that. These slides represent a synthesis of ongoing departmental research, including some promising undergraduate work." The undergraduate being Jasmine Williams, Dr. Chen clarified, "who I believe is here today." All heads turned, searching the room until they found Jasmine in the back row. She sat frozen, a storm of emotions churning inside her, anger, disappointment, and beneath it all a steely resolve. Dr. Winters stood up next. "Richard, correct me if I'm wrong, but these equations on slides 14 through 17 appear identical to those in Ms. Williams's paper, which the fellowship committee received yesterday." Professor Harrington's composure slipped. "As I said, it's a synthesis of—" "Without proper attribution," Dr. Okafor interrupted from his seat near the front. "In academia, we call this plagiarism." The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Graduate students exchanged glances. while faculty members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "That's a serious accusation," Harrington said stiffly. "Then perhaps we should clarify," Dr. Winters replied. "Ms. Williams, would you care to address the similarities between your work and what we've just seen?" Jasmine felt dozens of eyes on her. For a moment she considered staying silent, letting the moment pass. But then she thought of her grandmother's words. "Don't let anyone dim your light." She stood up, hands trembling slightly but voice steady. "Those equations on slides 14 through 17 are from my paper on nonlinear adaptive modeling in chaotic systems, which I submitted to Professor Harrington last week. The approach challenges his previously published theorem by introducing a variable boundary framework that accounts for systemic irregularities." The room was dead silent. "Furthermore," she continued, finding courage in the mathematics itself, "the conclusion that this approach produces more accurate predictive modeling isn't just theoretical. I've tested it against historical data sets from 3 different fields and found a 27% improvement in predictive accuracy." Dr. Reynolds, who had been watching the exchange with growing alarm, spoke up. "Perhaps Ms. Williams would be willing to walk us through her methodology?" Since she's here and clearly familiar with the work, Professor Harrington began to object, but Dr. Winters cut him off with a sharp look. "I think that's an excellent suggestion," she said. "Ms. Williams, would you mind?" Heart-racing, Jasmine made her way to the front of the room. Professor Harrington stood awkwardly by the podium, his presentation still projected on the screen behind him. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the computer controlling the slides. After a moment's hesitation, he stepped aside. For the next 15 minutes, Jasmine presented her research to a room full of mathematics professors and graduate students. She explained how she had identified the limitation in Harrington's theorem, walked through her alternative approach, and demonstrated the improved results. With each passing minute, her confidence grew. This was her work, her insight, her contribution to the field she loved. When she finished, the room erupted in applause, led by Aiden and Priya, who were beaming from their seats. Dr. Chen nodded approvingly, while Dr. Okafor gave her a subtle thumbs up. Professor Harrington stood to the side, his expression unreadable. As the colloquium broke up, faculty members approached Jasmine, asking questions about her methodology and findings. Dr. Winters pulled her aside briefly. "That was impressively handled," she said quietly. "And excellent work on the paper itself. We'll be discussing this incident at the next department meeting, but I want you to know that your contribution has been duly noted and will be properly credited." Later, as Jasmine was gathering her notes, Professor Harrington approached. They were alone in the lecture hall now, the others having moved to the reception in the adjoining room. "Ms. Williams," he began, his voice strained, "I owe you an apology." Jasmine waited, saying nothing. "I should have acknowledged your work properly," he continued. "It was an oversight." They both knew it wasn't, but Jasmine simply nodded. "I would appreciate proper citation in any future presentations or publications." "Of course," he said quickly. "And I want you to know that despite this misunderstanding, I still believe you have extraordinary potential. Your work genuinely advances the field." It was the closest thing to sincere praise she'd ever received from him, yet it felt hollow under the circumstances. "Thank you, Professor," she said formally. "If you'll excuse me, I should join the reception." As she walked away, she felt lighter somehow, as if standing up for her work had lifted a weight she'd been carrying since her first day at Westfield. The path forward wouldn't be easy. She had challenged not just a mathematical theorem, but the unwritten power dynamics of academia. But for the first time, she had done so not as an outsider trying to prove she belonged, but as a mathematician defending the integrity of her work. That night, she called her grandmother. "I'm so proud of you I could burst," Grandma Rose declared after hearing the story. "Standing up for yourself in front of all those professors." "I was terrified," Jasmine admitted, "but the math gave me courage. Numbers don't lie even when people do." "Your light is shining so bright now, baby," her grandmother said softly, "just like it was always meant to." As Jasmine hung up, she looked out her dorm window at the stars scattered across the spring sky. Whatever came next, consequences for Harrington, reactions from other faculty, her own future at Westfield, she had found her voice. And in the universal language of mathematics, that voice was speaking truths no one could deny. News of what happened at the mathematics colloquium spread across campus like wildfire. By the next morning, students in Jasmine's dorm were stopping her in the hallway to offer support, or simply stare in awe. Even professors from other departments nodded respectfully when she passed them on the quad. "You're officially a legend now," Zoe told her over breakfast. "Taking down Harrington in front of the whole department? That's going in Westfield history books." Jasmine picked at her food, uncomfortable with the attention. "I didn't take anyone down. I just stood up for my work." "Which makes you the bravest first year I've ever met," Raj added, joining them with his coffee. "Most of us are too scared to contradict a professor in class, let alone accuse one of stealing our research." "I didn't actually accuse him," Jasmine pointed out. Dr. Okafor did. But the distinction didn't matter to most people. The story had already taken on a life of its own, with details exaggerated and dialogue invented. In some versions, Jasmine had dramatically pointed a finger at Professor Harrington and called him a fraud. In others, she had solved an equation on the spot that he couldn't figure out. The reality was both more mundane and more significant. The day after the colloquium, Jasmine received an email from Dr. Winters requesting a meeting in her office. When she arrived, she found not only the department head but also the university's dean of academic affairs, a stern-looking woman named Dr. Powell. "Ms. Williams," Dr. Winters began once they were seated, "I want to thank you for coming. We're addressing the events of yesterday's colloquium with the seriousness they deserve." Jasmine nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. "I've reviewed your paper," Dr. Powell said, "as well as the slides from Professor Harrington's presentation. The similarity is undeniable, and the lack of attribution is a clear violation of academic ethics." "What happens now?" Jasmine asked quietly. The two senior academics exchanged glances. "Professor Harrington has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation," Dr. Winters explained. "The university takes plagiarism extremely seriously, regardless of the source or target." "I don't want to ruin his career," Jasmine said, surprising herself with the admission. Despite everything, she couldn't help feeling a twinge of sympathy for the man who had gone from trying to humiliate her to stealing her work, a strange trajectory that spoke of deep insecurity beneath his arrogant exterior. "This isn't about ruining careers," Dr. Powell assured her. "It's about maintaining the integrity of academic research. Your work deserves proper recognition, and the department needs to address what happened transparently." Dr. Winters leaned forward. "Which brings us to the other reason we wanted to meet with you. Your paper is exceptionally impressive, especially coming from a first-year undergraduate. With your permission, we'd like to submit it to the Journal of Applied Mathematical Theory, with you as the primary author and Dr. Chen as co-author." Jasmine stared at her in disbelief. "The JAMT? But that's one of the top journals in the field." "Yes, it is," Dr. Winters confirmed with a small smile. "And your work belongs there." As Jasmine left the meeting, her mind swirled with the implications. Publication in a prestigious journal as a first-year student was almost unheard of. It would open doors she hadn't even known existed. Research opportunities, conference invitations, perhaps even early admission to top graduate programs. But there was also the complicated matter of Professor Harrington. Despite his actions, she felt no satisfaction in his downfall. What she wanted wasn't revenge but recognition, not just for herself but for others like her who might come after. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of activity. Jasmine worked closely with Dr. Chen to prepare her paper for submission, refining the language and strengthening the mathematical proofs. Her regular coursework took a back seat to this more important project, though her professors were understanding given the circumstances. "Have you heard anything about Harrington?" she asked Dr. Chen one afternoon as they reviewed the latest draft. Dr. Chen hesitated before answering. "He's requested a formal hearing with the ethics committee. Beyond that, it's all confidential until they reach a decision." Jasmine nodded, turning her attention back to the equations before her. Whatever happened with Professor Harrington was out of her hands now. The mathematics was what mattered, the pure, perfect patterns that had been her comfort and passion for as long as she could remember. Spring blossomed across campus, trees budding with new leaves, flowers emerging from the soil. As the academic year neared its end, Jasmine received notice that she had been nominated for the prestigious Newman Mathematics Prize, an honor typically reserved for graduating seniors who had shown exceptional promise in the field. They're breaking all kinds of traditions for you. Zoe marveled when Jasmine shared the news. First the fellowship, now this prize. You're changing things around here. Not just me, Jasmine replied thoughtfully. Dr. Chen, Dr. Okafor, Dr. Winters, they're the ones making space at the table. I'm just showing up with my own plate. The Newman Prize ceremony was held in early May in the elegant main hall of the mathematics building. Faculty members in formal attire mingled with top students and university administrators. Jasmine wore a dress her grandmother had sent specially for the occasion, a deep purple with subtle geometric patterns woven into the fabric. You look beautiful, Dr. Chen told her when they met at the entrance. Nervous? A little, Jasmine admitted. I've never been good at speeches. Just speak from your heart, Dr. Chen advised. The mathematics speaks for itself. Inside, Jasmine found her designated seat near the front alongside the other nominees. Most were seniors she recognized from advanced classes, with a few exceptional juniors mixed in. She was the only first-year student, and certainly the only one who had started the year feeling like an outsider. Dr. Winters opened the ceremony with a brief history of the Newman Prize and its significance. Mathematics has always been about pushing boundaries, she concluded. About seeing patterns where others see only chaos and finding elegance in complexity. Our nominees exemplify these qualities. One by one, the nominees were introduced, their accomplishments listed proudly. When Jasmine's turn came, Dr. Winters spoke of her groundbreaking work in nonlinear adaptive modeling, her contributions to Dr. Chen's research group, and her forthcoming publication in the Journal of Applied Mathematical Theory. In just 1 year at Westfield, Dr. Winters said, Ms. Williams has demonstrated not only exceptional mathematical ability, but also the courage to stand by her work and the generosity to collaborate with others. She represents the very best of what we hope to nurture in our students. The room filled with applause, and Jasmine felt a flush of pride tinged with disbelief. Was this really happening to her? The girl from Detroit who had arrived just months ago, clutching her partial scholarship letter and feeling so out of place? When the time came to announce the winner, Dr. Powell stepped up to the podium. This year's Newman Mathematics Prize goes to a student who has shown us that brilliance knows no boundaries of age, background, or experience. Please join me in congratulating Jasmine Williams. The applause was deafening. Zoe and Raj, seated in the back, whistled and cheered. Dr. Chen beamed proudly as Jasmine made her way to the podium, legs shaking slightly beneath her purple dress. Thank you, she began, looking out at the sea of faces. I'm deeply honored by this recognition. She had prepared notes, but in that moment they seemed inadequate. Instead, she found herself speaking from the heart. When I came to Westfield, I wasn't sure I belonged here. I knew I loved mathematics, the beauty of it, the truth of it. But I didn't know if there was room for someone like me in these hallowed halls. The room was utterly silent now. Every face turned toward her. What I've learned this year is that mathematics itself doesn't care where you come from or what you look like. It only cares about the elegance of your thinking and the rigor of your proofs. And while people might have biases, numbers never do. From the corner of her eye, she noticed a figure slipping into the back of the room. Professor Harrington. He stood against the wall, his expression solemn but not angry. Their eyes met briefly before she continued. I want to thank the people who saw past stereotypes and expectations to recognize what I could contribute. Dr. Chen, who welcomed me into her research group and treated me as a colleague rather than just a student. Dr. Okafor and Dr. Winters, who championed my work, and my grandmother, who couldn't be here tonight but who taught me that mathematics is where physics and poetry meet. She paused, gathering her thoughts for the conclusion. This prize honors my work, but it also represents a commitment to making sure that future students with a passion for mathematics find open doors instead of barriers, mentorship instead of skepticism, and recognition based on the quality of their thinking rather than the circumstances of their birth. As she stepped away from the podium, the applause resumed, building into a standing ovation. Dr. Chen was the first on her feet, followed by Zoe and Raj, then the entire room. Even Professor Harrington, still standing at the back, nodded once in what might have been respect before slipping out the door. At the reception afterward, Jasmine found herself surrounded by faculty members eager to discuss her research and future plans. Dr. Powell pulled her aside. briefly to mention that the ethics committee had reached a decision regarding Professor Harrington. He would keep his position but lose his department chairmanship and undergo ethics training. He also insisted on writing a formal acknowledgement of your contribution to the field, to be published alongside his retraction. Dr. Powell added, I believe he's trying in his way to make amends. Later that night, alone in her dorm room, Jasmine called her grandmother. I wish you could have been there, Grandma, she said, still wearing her purple dress as she described the ceremony. I was there in spirit. Baby, Grandma Rose replied, her voice thick with emotion. And your parents were too, looking down on their brilliant girl. After they hung up, Jasmine stood by her window, looking out at the campus that had transformed from an alien landscape to a place where she had proven herself, found her voice, and begun to build a future. 3 years later, when Jasmine graduated with highest honors and accepted a fellowship at MIT, she insisted on one addition to Westfield's mathematics program, a new scholarship specifically for underrepresented students with promise in STEM fields. She served on the selection committee personally, determined to ensure that the next brilliant mind from an unexpected place would find doors open rather than closed. The scholarship's name, the Williams Rose Fellowship, honoring both her own journey and the grandmother who had taught her that no light, no matter how bright, should ever be dimmed.